Convicted killer Gary Davis will die in less than 2 weeks on Monday, October 13th at 8 p.m. Governor Romer made the announcement today.
October 13th, 1997, a dimly lit room at the Colorado State Penitentiary falls silent as medical personnel prepare the lethal cocktail. Strapped to a gurney, Gary Lee Davis is about to make history. He would become the first and only person executed in Colorado in over 30 years, and the last in the state's history. While in prison, Davis seemed to accept his fate. I received over a dozen letters today from Colorado Christians saying how much they want me dead, he wrote. But how did Colorado, a state that executed 102 people before 1967, come to perform just one execution in over half a century? And what made Davis's crime so disturbing that it pushed Colorado to do something it hadn't done in decades? The answers reveal a state deeply torn on capital punishment, and a man whose darkness ran even deeper than his crimes. The death row prisoner that became Gary Lee Davis wasn't born. He was forged, one trauma at a time. Born in 1944 in Wichita, Kansas, Davis was the middle of 3 sons. His mother remarried when he was just 8, bringing 2 older stepbrothers into his life. In a 1987 letter that he asked to be read and destroyed, as well as in conversations with psychologists during the appeals process, Davis claimed that his earliest sexual experiences came at the hands of 2 older stepbrothers who used him like an inflatable doll. "I was abused dozens of times as a kid," he wrote, then went into grim detail about how his 2 teenage stepbrothers would come home from dates, shove their crotches in his face, and force him into unspeakable acts. One of his brothers remembered young Gary as a pushover. He said Gary was a quiet kid who couldn't be aggressive and wouldn't fight nobody. Davis never told his parents what happened. He never even confronted his stepbrothers. "I don't feel any anger toward them," he wrote in 1987. "A little hurt, but what can I say?" Davis quit school after 9th grade. At 17, he joined the Marines, and after boot camp, he married his childhood sweetheart, Tonya Ann Tatum. They had 2 sons, but things started crumbling once he got shipped to Okinawa. Consumed by wild jealousy and convinced she was cheating, he drowned himself in booze. The Marines spotted these danger signs early. They saw that he was paranoid as hell, and he drank like a fish. Sure, the government wanted ruthless killers, but they preferred the stable kind. So when Davis started drunkenly bragging about how he'd like to shove a bayonet into an officer, the brass decided he had homicidal tendencies and an emotional, unstable personality with schizoid trends. Next thing he knew, he was handed a medical discharge and shown the door. Back in civilian life, Davis bounced between jobs, but he couldn't hold anything down for long thanks to a string of car crashes and workplace accidents. Eventually, his wife had enough and left, taking the kids with her. Later, he'd blamed the divorce on his supposed career as a traveling male stripper, which honestly sounds like total BS. That said, Davis did briefly work as a go-go dancer in drag as part of a nightclub comedy act. And even if the whole stripper story was just another one of his fantasies, it wasn't far off from the kind of exhibitionism in which he'd soon make a habit of. "When I got older, early 20s, I found myself going around showing myself to women wherever I could," he wrote. "I'd show myself, and after the woman would see me, I'd find somewhere to jack off. As years went by, just showing myself wasn't enough. I had to touch. I needed some pussy by force to hear the girl or woman scream and beg as I did. Every person I assaulted, I enjoyed. Alcohol was a constant part of the equation. The more I drank, the more I committed assaults. When I wasn't drinking, I wasn't thinking of harming others. Give me a drink and I had to have it." He would later boast of assaulting 15 women, mostly targeting young and vulnerable teenagers who would be too frightened to report him. Before 1969, all his arrests were just booze-related, drunk driving, peeing on sidewalks, that kind of thing. Even when he moved up to real crimes, for example, a grand larceny an embezzlement in 1969, a burglary in 1970. None of those showed what was really going on inside him. But something ugly was taking over. The exposing, the assaulting, the need to inflict pain. He put it bluntly, "I've never thought about getting into trouble until it's over. During and before it happens, all I'd think about was making them do whatever I wanted. I'd just lay there with a smirk on my face, yelling at them and watching them cry and beg me not to hurt them. Some of the girls were real young, some were grown women. I'd treat all of them the same. If they didn't cry or beg, it would take the excitement out of it." In 1974, a 30-year-old Davis somehow convinced 17-year-old Leona Coates to marry him. 8 years and 4 kids later, the marriage collapsed. Well, not that it ever stood a chance. Davis needed more excitement than domestic life could offer. He'd later say Leona was already pregnant when they met, calling the whole thing a bad mistake, though he stuck around as long as she kept popping out babies. Leona has given different versions of their marriage. Right after Davis got sentenced to death, she told cops he'd abused her when drunk, tried to pressure her into a threesome, and once pulled a gun on her. But 9 years later, during his appeals, she backtracked, saying the gun was plastic and Davis was just a weekend drunk who'd been a decent family man, that the threesome never happened with Leona. Sadly, Davis would get his absurd fantasies fulfilled later, in much darker ways. The last few years of their marriage saw Davis accumulating charges. In 1979, he tricked a convenience store clerk into coming outside by pretending that the ice machine was broken, then put a knife to her throat and dragged her toward an alley. She fought him off, but received several wounds to her hand and neck. Clearly, his aim was to assault her, but he plea bargained down to felony menacing and served less than a year. Davis wasn't out long before striking again, this time assaulting a 15-year-old friend of Leona's daughter at knife point. Davis claimed the girl was just upset he wouldn't pay her for intimate activities. Luckily, prosecutors sided with the victim's story. Somehow, Davis managed to plea bargain his way to an 8-year assault for sexual assault, which meant that, barring bad behavior, he'd be out of prison in less than 4. Looking back, the warning signs were obvious. Both attacks showed a predator deliberately targeting vulnerable victims. But way back in the early 80s, the system still treated individuals like Davis as basically harmless troublemakers who just needed to avoid alcohol. Prison staff actually thought Davis was a model inmate. He kept his head down, earned special privileges, and went through the motions of alcohol counseling, all the while counting down to his first drink after release. And like many convicts, he started collecting female pen pals. One day, another inmate gave Davis the address of Rebecca Becky Fincham, a lonely woman who'd been writing to prisoners through personal ads. Davis started sending her letters too. Becky wrote back, telling him about her 2 young daughters and her difficult marriage to someone with alcohol problems. Davis played the sympathetic ear, laying on the charm. After a few letters, she directly asked him, "Do you miss physical intimacy?" It was not so much a question as an invitation. Davis wrote back saying yes, he missed it. And just like that, Becky's letters went from flirty to explicit. To call them suggestive would be an understatement. They were extremely graphic. Turns out Becky wasn't just talk. As the investigators later found out, she and her ex had been into partner swapping back when they were stationed in West Germany. They'd even brought back a suitcase full of adult material when they moved back to the States. Davis was impressed. Finally, a woman who could match his imagination, his perfect partner. Together, they were going to do some terrible things. Then he actually met her. Becky showed up to visit him in prison, and here was an overweight woman whose eyebrows were weirdly missing, and she had scars all over her arms and chest, which she claimed was from an assault on an army base years ago. Davis was repulsed. Years later, he'd even admit he was scared of her because she was so overweight. But hey, she was devoted to him. She bought him a TV, fancy boots, silk handkerchiefs, The works. Now divorced, she visited every weekend, dragging her daughters along, and always slipped him spending money. Davis figured she'd be his meal ticket inside and out. So in 1984, he proposed. Shockingly, she said yes. They got married over the phone, and Becky's kids started calling him Daddy. Not long after, another inmate took an interest in Becky's 13-year-old daughter and asked Davis if he could write to her. Neither Davis nor Becky had a problem with it. In fact, Becky even sent along some inappropriate photos, a revealing shot of herself for Davis, and a semi-clothed image of her daughter for his friend. Prison officials intercepted them, obviously, and Becky got charged with exploitation of a minor and lost visitation rights. Unable to have any physical contact, the newlyweds had to get creative. They came up with a phone game. Becky would act out whatever inappropriate scenario Davis demanded. Neither seemed to care that prison staff was listening to every call. According to Davis, Becky described some disturbing fantasies: picking up a Davis look-alike, meeting a woman at a bar, being intimate with a friend while her husband watched, even being assaulted by someone who looked like a prison guard. The fantasies were at the core of what they had together. More satisfactory, certainly, than the physical relationship they embarked upon when Davis emerged from prison in 1985. But freedom came with problems. Becky was on probation for the whole child exploitation thing. So to have Davis move in, she had to ship her daughters off to her parents. Plus, with both of them under court supervision, Davis had to try to behave. No drinking, no threatening underage girls. For a few weeks, it almost worked. They got jobs managing an apartment building in Aurora, and Davis mostly stayed away from alcohol. But he couldn't hide his disgust for Becky, and soon they were both drinking again and chasing new thrills. "I thought when I married Becky that I could overlook her being so overweight," he later wrote. "She had a place for me to come out to, and I knew I would not be lonely, but I was wrong. I was lonely, even with her. I took up drinking again to fill the empty void in my life. Also, I drank to have the stomach to touch that large woman." Davis had his eye on another woman in the apartment building, who he saw as more attractive than his own wife. He actually told a buddy he wanted to drug and assault her. After 6 months, the Davises got kicked out. They were accused of scamming other tenants, taking money for repairs and services that were never provided. So Becky faked a resume claiming they were experienced ranch hands and landed them a job in Byers in February 1986. But there was a problem. Byers was a small town that didn't offer much social activity. If Davis wanted to creep on women, he had to go into town, usually dragging Fincham along. They would sit around fantasizing about taking women against their will. In May, they bought a .22 rifle at a Fort Morgan discount store. This was a clear parole violation, but Davis figured nobody would care. And he was right. If anyone asked him what the rifle was for, Davis had his answer ready. It was for all the snakes around his house. That summer, Davis was drinking constantly. He and Becky cruised Fort Morgan looking for their perfect companion. But Davis kept eyeing their neighbors, Virginia May and her sister-in-law Sue. He'd make inappropriate comments about May while fixing fences near her property, even once exposing himself toward her house, saying, "Come on, Virginia, baby, I'm here, come to me." Meanwhile, May, a 34-year-old rancher's wife with 2 kids, had no idea she had become the focus of Davis's disturbing thoughts. As it turned out, Fincham and Davis actually failed in 2 attempts before targeting May. On July 18, 1986, Tammy Beaupre was working on her farm near Wiggins, Colorado, when a green sedan with Kansas plates pulled up. While the woman driver asked for directions to Byers, the man got out and tried to sneak up behind Beaupre. Luckily for Tammy, her husband showed up, and just like that, the man scrambled back into the car and they peeled off. Later, Beaupre would testify that those 2 strange visitors were none other than Becky and Davis. 3 days later, July 21st, the last day of Davis's parole, Becky Becky Davis called Sue McLennan and asked, "Is your husband home?" When Sue said no, Becky offered to bring over some hand-me-down kids' clothes. But they showed up armed with a .22 rifle instead of children's clothes. When they spotted a ranch hand on the property, Becky got nervous and said, "I thought you said your husband wasn't home." Becky stayed only long enough for a quick iced tea. Her husband never got out of the car. Between 6:20 and 7 p.m. of the same day, the couple headed to Virginia May's place after Becky had called with the same story about children's clothes. When they pulled in, Virginia came out to greet them with her 4-year-old daughter, Krista. Becky lured her to a tool shed with a request to borrow some wire stretchers. When they emerged, Gary Davis struck May in the face and dragged her into the car while Becky shooed Krista into the house. Then the couple, with May as their captive, drove away quickly. While Becky drove, Davis held Virginia May down in the back seat of the car, removed her clothing, and violated her. They took her to a remote spot where Gary tied a rope around her neck like a leash. At knife point, he assaulted her again, then forced her to perform intimate acts with Becky. When they were done, Davis struck Virginia's skull with his rifle butt, hard enough to fracture it, but she somehow stayed conscious. Forensic evidence showed Virginia had her hands up defensively when Gary started shooting. She pleaded for her life, even offering $1,000 to be let go, but Gary kept firing. When Becky asked if Virginia was deceased, Gary emptied the rest of the clip into her, including shots to sensitive areas of her body. In total, 14 bullets were fired, 9 to the head, 4 to the torso, 1 to the lower body. Then they casually covered the body with hay and went back for their beer cooler because, as Davis put it, it had a few more beers in it. Meanwhile, Gary May, Virginia's husband, got home around 8 that evening after a marketing meeting at the Scott McLennan Ranch. He immediately knew something was wrong when he found his young children alone and frightened, with signs his wife had left in a hurry. When the kids told him Becky took her, Gary sprang into action, first calling his in-laws and then searching for Virginia with their help. Everyone quickly suspected Davis and Becky, especially after Sue McLennan mentioned her earlier run-in with them. Virginia's family eventually called the Adams County Sheriff's Department, and a deputy arrived around 11 p.m. After taking statements and checking out the Davis home, the deputy spotted car lights while patrolling the area. He pulled the vehicle over and found Davis and Becky inside. When questioned about Virginia's disappearance, they claimed they knew nothing. The deputy let them go, and they went home where Virginia's relatives kept an eye on them all night. Early the next morning, when family members confronted them again, they maintained their innocence, saying Virginia was fine when they left to go fishing. Becky even offered her sympathy to the victim's father. "We want to do everything we can to help you find your daughter," she told Rod McLennan, Ginny May's father. "I know how you feel. I was once attacked myself." Based on what the children had said and the couple's suspicious behavior, Gary and Becky were arrested that morning. At the Strasburg Sheriff's substation, Davis refused to say anything unless he could talk to Fincham first. They let the two speak privately in a small library room at the station. According to reports, Davis said, "The ball game's over, babe," and Fincham replied, "Don't tell them anything. We'll get a lawyer." On July 21st, 1987, exactly 1 year after Ginny May's death, Gary Davis learned he was going to death row. The jury needed just 3 hours to convict him of kidnapping and taking a life. 3 more hours was all it took to sentence him to death. Now, keep in mind that Colorado had not executed anyone in 30 years by 1997. The last execution in the state was in 1967, when Luis Monge, an insurance salesman from Denver, was put to death for taking the lives of his wife and 3 of their 10 children. The alleged motive was to prevent the exposure of his inappropriate behavior toward their 13-year-old daughter. During this period, the death penalty system had become largely inactive, with many death row inmates dying of old age before being executed. But Gary Davis changed that. His case broke the pattern for 3 reasons. Firstly, his crime was especially brutal. Secondly, he had a long history of violence. And thirdly, he seemed to want to die. That's right, Davis had completely undermined his own defense team by taking the stand and claiming full responsibility for the crime. His lawyer, Craig Truman, had been trying to avoid the death penalty by arguing that Rebecca Fincham, already convicted of taking a life and facing life in prison, was equally guilty. But Davis ended up being the prosecution's star witness. He'd gotten a 10-page letter from Becky, who had divorced him by then, telling him to do the right thing. And what did he decide that meant? Saying yes, sir, like an obedient schoolboy every time prosecutor Bob Grant asked if he'd abducted, assaulted, and taken the life of May. And then, in a packed courtroom, he confessed again, and that was it for him. Right after his trial, he wrote to Governor Romer asking him to make a quick decision about clemency instead of waiting for all the appeals. "If you decide death," he pleaded, "can't we please get it done?" His hurry probably wasn't about feeling sorry for what he'd done. It was more like an old prisoner tired of being stuck with his own thoughts. His early letters from death row are full of self-pity and disgust. But despite what he said in court, he was still denying he took Virginia May's life. Death seemed easier than facing the horrible damage he'd caused. In the summer of 1990, Davis fired his lawyer and told his new attorney, Dennis Hartley, not to file any more appeals. Hartley pushed back hard, explaining there were still good options to explore, like claiming ineffective counsel during the trial. Truman had only called 2 witnesses during sentencing, and Hartley felt the jury should have heard more about factors that might have mattered. Things like Davis's alcoholism, possible brain damage from a car accident in the 60s, his passive-aggressive personality, and how Fincham supposedly took the lead in the incident. Truman helped with this appeal, but federal courts ruled that the experienced defense lawyer had done his best, considering his client refused to help. Davis finally gave in and let Hartley continue, but only after one of his daughters called and reportedly told him he wouldn't get to see his grandchild unless he kept fighting. While researching the appeals, Hartley managed to reconnect Davis with family members he'd lost touch with, including his first 2 wives and their children, which gave him more reason to want to live. Of course, Ginny May never got the choice to live, not even for a few more moments. But the decision was surprisingly hard for Davis. As he said in his clemency interview, death can seem like a blessing compared to life alone in a maximum security prison. To me, that's a worse sentence than the death penalty. In 1993, they moved Davis to Colorado's new Supermax prison, the Colorado State Penitentiary. This was the state's toughest lockup, designed to keep violent inmates isolated 23 hours a day. It ended up housing all 5 of Colorado's death row inmates at the time. Caged in an 80-square-foot cell with few privileges and no opportunity to breathe fresh air, Davis wasn't exactly living it up. When his federal appeals dried up, he could have fought on in state courts. But more years in that confinement? No thanks.
Convicted killer Gary Davis will die in less than 2 weeks on Monday, October 13th at 8 p.m. Governor Romer made the announcement today.
The day after he learned that Romer had denied him clemency, Davis found time to write a final letter to his friend. "Well, the bomb has blown up on my life. Can't really believe it's going to happen. If I forget later down the road, I want to thank you for your support. I need to close this and get started on a stack of mail 6 inches deep. I can't say goodbye, so I'll say see you later. Your friend, Gary." Those were the last words Gary Lee Davis would write as a free man. In the days that followed, the machinery of justice moved forward with cold precision, each hour bringing him closer to his appointment with history. Fast forward to October 13th, 1997, the very day of his execution. For the staff, it was a day unlike any other in 3 decades. There were meticulous preparations for a procedure most had never performed. They used 3 drugs for lethal injection. Sodium thiopental would make Davis unconscious. Pancuronium bromide would stop his breathing. Potassium chloride would stop his heart. The process took 11 minutes from start to finish. Witnesses watched through glass windows as Davis lay strapped to a gurney. 5 reporters attended, along with the victims' family members. Also present were the prosecutor and one of Davis's former lawyers. The room was small and quiet. Outside the prison, people stood divided. Some held signs saying "Justice for Virginia." Others prayed for Davis's soul. The crowd showed Colorado's mixed feelings about capital punishment. Even after such a horrible crime, not everyone agreed with the execution. Meanwhile, the execution team followed strict procedures. They wanted everything to go smoothly. Davis cooperated fully. He didn't resist or complain. His last meal was chocolate and vanilla ice cream. He ate it all. When the time came, he walked calmly to the execution room. Witnesses described the scene as clinical and controlled. The prison staff worked efficiently. No one showed emotion. The only sound was the quiet hum of medical equipment. Davis made no final statement. He simply closed his eyes as the drugs took effect. No one spoke as the drugs began flowing. At 8:33 p.m., a doctor pronounced Davis deceased. The state had done what it hadn't done in 30 years. However, Davis's death didn't change Colorado's approach. In the next 23 years, 9 more men received death sentences, but none were executed. The state went back to avoiding executions right after Davis died. His case proved to be the exception, not the rule. What do you think? Was justice served that October night in 1997? Or did the state cross a line it shouldn't have? Share your thoughts on capital punishment and whether you believe Davis's case warranted this ultimate penalty. The debate continues today. Where do you stand? Also, like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done that already.